Hello and welcome to another Top Grades Made Easy video. This is going to be really useful to you if you're doing the November retake, and it comes from Genius456, and he sent me a piece of description which has led me to make this video. Stop describing! The idea here is that description can be too extra. It just overwhelms your writing and stops it getting the top grades. Even though you're describing all the time, it goes wrong because you're describing all the time. And obviously I can't really tell you what that means. It's confusing, but I'll show you. Let's read through this together and then you'll see why I make the changes I do. Darkness encapsulated the only source of light shining from the station as the immensely sinister train glided in my path, creating a distasteful and uneasy feeling in the air. Charred as black as the soul of a devil, the dilapidated doors drearily open. I felt a stab of cold pierce through my weary heart, and numbness ran through my body. Lifelessly the driver, who bears an empty expression upon his ghost-like face, stared at me with his queerly beady eyes, and I felt a stinging sensation rip my insides. My senses urged me that something was not right. I decided to leave, but grievously a skeletal hand grabbed my arm, twisted it, and flung me to the passenger seats. Glancing around cautiously, I made my way to an empty seat, which was repugnant and was surrounded by aberrant passengers who looked like prisoners with their uniform facial expression. Building up the courage and swallowing the fear which was raging inside me, I solemnly whispered, "Hello?" Robotically, each passenger blankly gazed at me. Upon their foreheads were strange markings. So, very sinister writing, packed full, crammed full of description. Should be awesome, right? But no, not yet. Probably the biggest problem that students have when they're really getting into description is they keep changing their tense. And that's typical of writers who are just sneaking into grade 4, but often falling back into grade 3. So let's go back to the first verb, encapsulated, which you can see is in the past tense. I won't go through all the examples that go into the present, but there's an obvious one at the beginning of the next paragraph. When you switch tense, it simply becomes confusing. Don't do it. Now, even though Genius only made this mistake twice, as I read it, I instinctively felt that it was wrong. I actually, in my mind, had an idea that he did this more often. But that's the point. It will upset the reader's experience, and it will certainly upset the examiner. Okay, now I want to focus on the idea of show, not tell. First, I'm going to colour code the adjectives in here. Okay, you can see there are 6, and that is overdoing it. The next issue we have is one of tone. Genius wants to create a tone and atmosphere here of impending dread and the build-up of horror and fear. However, having 2 massive long sentences actually goes against that desired tone. It stops it being sinister. So let's see what happens when I decide to show rather than tell. This now becomes: a single light stared out from the station. I was alone on the platform. The train glided, silent in the still cold air, and stopped. I reached for the door with a numb heart. So the short sentences bring us closer to the sinister moment inside the train. Now I have deliberately kept 6 adjectives so that I can show you the difference between showing and telling. If we go back to Genius's adjectives, distasteful, uneasy and sinister, and even dilapidated, tell us how we should feel. Now the trick is to use adjectives in a way that make the reader work that out for themselves, because they want to. So if we look at the station having a single light, this automatically makes us feel uneasy. Why would it have only one light? Surely this should have been fixed. I was alone on the platform. Now this adds to a sinister atmosphere because we can tell that the protagonist is already in darkness. there's no light on the platform, so we automatically have a dark, sinister setting. We don't have to tell the reader how dark it is. The train glided silent. Well, silent is something that trains shouldn't do, and so that gets over the idea that it's sinister without having to tell the reader. And similarly, the air shouldn't be still if a train is coming through the platform. If you've ever stood on a platform, you'll know what I mean. And so therefore, that is sinister, and it does create that distasteful and uneasy feeling that Genius was trying to show us. Now, I don't need to show that my heart is weary and that a numbness ran through my body, because the heart is right at the centre of the body, metaphorically and also even literally. So when I say I reached for the door with a numb heart, we get the idea that this numbness must run throughout the body, and we also get a bonus here, the idea that there is some emotional turmoil in the protagonist that has caused them no longer to feel emotions properly. Now Genius whapped in a load of alliteration here, devil dilapidated doors drearily, but that's overdoing it. It makes it almost comic. If you are going to overdo alliteration, the idea is to use the letter S, which creates sibilance, and that matches a sinister atmosphere, like the hissing of the snake that you've probably been taught about. So silent and still does that job for me. And you can also see that here, single, stared and station. Now that sibilance, which creates the sound of hissing, works well. I also have in mind here a past setting, and so the reader might be hearing this hiss and imagining an old-fashioned steam train. At the minute, I haven't decided whether that's going to be important to my story, so it's just a hint. Right, now let's look at the second paragraph. Instead of this long description of the lifeless driver grabbing my arm with his skeletal hand and my senses feeling that something wasn't quite right, I have this. The driver stared through me as I hesitated. The reader knows something isn't right, which is why the protagonist is hesitating, and they confer that what's not right is the driver staring through him in a hostile way, and perhaps something more supernatural. He locked a skeletal hand on my wrist and jerked me inside. Instantly I have the idea of violence, linked to the idea of skeletal, which suggests that he is a ghost-like or death-like figure, but also reveals his power. He locked his skeletal hand on my wrist. And so that's the same power that Genius wanted, with grabbed my arm, twisted it and flung me to the passenger seats. So I don't need all those verbs to keep telling the reader what's going on. These two, locked and jerked, convey that violence for me. Here I've got the idea of all these passengers behaving in these weird robotic ways and filling me with fear. The passengers looked up as one, with the same blank eyes. So I've introduced the idea that there's something wrong and robotic about them with the word same and then the description blank. I'm going to carry that idea on here. I forced out a hello as I made my way to the single empty seat. As one, they lifted their gaze to me, which is when I noticed the markings. So this idea of them all behaving as one organism automatically makes them seem robotic and machine-like and sinister. I don't have to tell the reader that. The verb lifted their gaze instead of gazed at me also gives us the idea that this is a mechanical action, and so that creates the robotic idea. Let's now look at the adjectives. These are the ones that Genius used, and I've confined myself to 3, which I'm going to show you do the same work. So the idea that the driver has an empty expression and a ghost-like face is already conveyed through the idea of skeletal. This automatically makes him seem ghost-like, and because he is gazing through me, I already know that his expression is empty. I don't have to tell the reader that, I have shown them. Similarly, when we go further, it doesn't help me to know that he also had queerly beady eyes. Like, who cares? The guy's ghost-like, that's the big news. And so I have that with the idea of skeletal. Now, I don't need to tell my readers that I made my way to an empty seat because, duh, that's what passengers do. But knowing that this is the only seat is now much more sinister. The reader wonders if it's kept empty specifically for him. Is this a planned meeting? Do they have a plan for him? What's going to happen next? Now, to tell us that the passengers are aberrant or even that they're repugnant instead of the seat being repugnant, well, I don't need to tell the readers that. They can work this out from this robotic behaviour we talked about earlier. The blank eyes that they have, the lack of a greeting that they return, and the way that they're behaving as one unit, machine or being. We realise, of course, that everything about them is uniform. Next we come to the markings. Notice I've got no adjective to describe the markings. Why haven't you told them the markings are strange, Mr. Salles? Well, because people having markings on their heads is strange anyway, even in this age of tattoos. We can work this strangeness out for ourselves because he noticed the markings when they lifted their gaze to me. So this must mean the markings are close to the eyes, which must mean the markings are on people's faces. Well, that is weird, isn't it, for all of them to have that? We've worked it out for ourselves, and so we feel rewarded. Now, it's important to remember that I haven't introduced any extra mystery. I want my readers to work hard, but not so hard that they can't work things out with a little bit of thought. And this video has been about showing you how my writing allows the reader to work things out quite easily as they go along. You really don't want to create a mystery that isn't easy to solve here. By the end of the story, we need to be utterly and completely sure about why these strange people are behaving strangely and what the role is of our passenger on the train. At the end of the story, there must be no mystery left unresolved. That's just incomplete, incoherent, and annoying. The next thing you really need to focus on are adverbs. In an exam, you can only write a short piece of writing, and each adverb you use slows the pace and the action down. They actually stop you bringing the reader along with you. So Genius has used 6 adverbs here, and I have used 0, a big fat nada, because doing that actually increases the tension. I get to this spot where I notice the markings, which I assume is a really big turning point in the story here, much more quickly than Genius did. His description is 119 words long and mine is only 61. Now you might say, no, adverbs are a descriptive technique, Mr. Salles, and my teacher tells me to put them in. Why are you making my head hurt? So do this. Grab 10 fiction books from wherever you can and open them up at a random page numbers and look at them. What do you notice about the adjectives that they use, the number of adverbs, and the sentence lengths? Now, if you really want to see how to do this in detail, my guide to awesome story writing, available on Amazon, link below in the description, will do that brilliantly. And apparently people who bought that book sometimes buy my language guide and my description guide. How exciting it used to be that all these books along here were written by Mr. Bruff. The description guide is even cheaper because it's shorter and will show you exactly how to craft descriptions which get you the top grades. Good luck! See you soon on my channel.